Have you ever get a bad feedback from your manager on your work? What do you do in this case? So in this video I would like to share with you an approach that actually worked for me, and I hope it will work for you. To be honest with you, I wasn't always very good with accepting critical feedback. Sometimes I would get defensive, sometimes I would argue, so I had to come up with an algorithm that actually works quite well for me. And now I would like to share this algorithm with you. So today we're going to explore 4-step algorithm to processing negative feedback, and also I'm going to give you a little bit of extra advice which might be sometimes necessary when it comes to negative feedback at workplace. This video is for people who are soon going to have a performance review and are worried about getting a negative feedback during this performance review. Or for example, if you had a negative feedback from a manager which you handled badly and it did not work very well. Let's start with the first step, which is accept feedback. The thing is, any negative feedback shows you an area for improvement. You can either improve the way you perform or how you show your performance to other people. Let's consider myself, for example. Sometimes I'm doing more than expected from me, but I'm not properly communicating this, so people don't see the results of my work, and that is not very good. It not only letting me down by not showing that I'm actually pulling some extra weight, it also prevents my manager from their responsibility to stop me from doing some extra if it's necessary. So listen to the person who gives you feedback, and I also would recommend to thank a person for giving you feedback. Not every manager, not every person in general is good at providing feedback, and providing a negative feedback usually is not very easy task. Never take it personal, really. Well, unless it is personal, but that's we're going to discuss a little bit later. And don't push back on the spot, especially if you feel emotional, and especially if you feel that you have to push back because the person who is giving you feedback is very, very wrong. It doesn't mean you're not going to push back at all. It means you're not going to push back on the spot for two reasons. Reason number one, you might as well be wrong, and the feedback is justified. Reason number two, you might as well be right, but you will make a very bad job at communicating that when you are emotional. And if it's necessary, if a person who gives you feedback is really frustrated with you, apologize for things not looking right. And it is very important that we are apologizing for things not looking right, not for not being right, because at this point we are not yet sure. But at the very least, we already know that things are not looking right for a person who gave us a feedback. And if things are looking really bad, it would be right for us to apologize. Now, one thing is to get a negative feedback. It's already a very important piece of information. You know that something is not looking right, something is not, someone is not happy with you. But you need to make it actionable. You need to know what you can do about that. So the next step in the algorithm is to make this feedback actionable. And to do this, I would recommend you to gather data. Maybe monitor your work, see what kind of metrics are used to evaluate your performance. Try to see for yourself, are things as they look? And sometimes they are. And if this is the case, you need to acknowledge that things are not actually right. So essentially you need to accept the responsibility for not doing as well as you're supposed to. And you need to plan an improvement. What actions you're going to do so this feedback stops being accurate. Regarding how to plan an improvement, it's probably worth another video, so if you think it's something you would like to hear about, please drop me a comment. But sometimes the feedback is not fully justified, and you also need to know about that and gather data. And if you see backed by data that feedback is not justified. You need to communicate this. So essentially that's your way of pushing back. But you're not pushing back, you're not saying you're wrong. You're saying that the data suggests is that the things are not the way they looked like for a person who gave you feedback. And you're also going to plan a communication or reporting improvement. Going back to my case, when I'm doing some extra job, instead of just silently doing this extra job, I can either communicate that the job was done or ask my manager if they're happy with me doing this job. And that's what I mean by planning communication or reporting improvement. Alright, so at this point, you already accepted feedback, you process it, you made it actionable, and you should have a plan of what you're going to do about the feedback. What I also would recommend doing is to suggest checking in more often. So you want to avoid getting negative feedback in the future. You want to avoid things not looking right. So you can suggest to your manager to check in, for example, how your plan for improvement is being executed. If your manager is less happy with you, if your manager is more happy with you, and essentially just probably speak every now and then and see how you're doing. And also you can agree, and you probably should agree with your manager on how you will evaluate if there is still a problem. So it will be obvious both for you and for your manager that the problem is gone or is not gone by some objective measure. And you can also, if you think that you know how to fix things, you can also suggest a correction plan. Like, for example, okay, I see I'm not doing this right, and that's what I'm going to do about that. And that will not only show your manager that you are getting serious about the feedback that you just heard, it also shows your manager that you are probably a good person to work with, because no one in this world can work well all the time. Expectation change, environment change, culture change, and you cannot be on the right side forever. So it's very important to know, to see by example, that after getting a negative feedback you can adjust. Now it's time for a little extra. This video will not be complete if I didn't mention something which surprisingly was a part of my work experience, and I noticed that this something which I thought should not be the case was not at all rare. You need to make sure that what you're experiencing is a feedback and not a bullying. Sometimes, unfortunately, managers can bully subordinates and give a negative feedback, not with the goal to correct your actions, but with some other goals really. And how you can spot the bullying? I think you can use these simple checks. So if you get a negative feedback, that doesn't imply actions. You're just bad person, you're just bad professional, and there's nothing you can do about that, there's nothing in the world, you just need to suffer because of that. Or they implying that team suffers because you're being bad. If you think you're experiencing a guilt trap where you're being made feeling guilty for something instead of corrected actions, that might also be a sign of bullying. Another sign of bullying, and probably one of the most brightest signs of bullying, is a regular public negative feedback targeting a specific person. Let's say there is a particular person in a team not performing well, and they being targeted with public negative feedback. And because they are always humiliated, there are very good chances that they will underperform for forever. And if you see something like that, it's probably a time to call out. That is almost by definition another test for bullying that you might see, or maybe not so for bullying, but for toxic management or dysfunctional management really, is when you get a moving target. Nothing is good enough. You reach a goal that was set during the previous negative feedback session, but it's still not good enough. Sometimes your manager promises you something and then they are saying that they did not promise that, things like that. It's also a very good sign of either a bullying or a toxicity going on around. And unreasonable or unacceptable expectations, while might not necessarily be a bullying, but almost always a sign that something is not being right. And what I mean by unreasonable or unacceptable expectations, for example, it is completely unreasonable to demand for a person who has a remote only work contract to go back to office. It's also unreasonable for a person who had one working schedule to change working schedule without a choice in an ultimatum way, like you either changing the schedule or you're gone. It's unreasonable to demand people to not care for their family, and it doesn't have to be processed as feedback. It has to be processed as bullying. And as I mentioned, I had an experience of being bullied at a workplace, and if you want to know what to do, drop me a comment. I can make a video on this topic as well. Yes, so that is everything that I had for you for today. I really hope that you enjoyed the video and the new video format. I will probably stick to mind mapping videos for some time. Again, please drop me a comment what you think about that. Like this video if it was helpful. Subscribe to my channel if you think more videos like this can be helpful for you. It was Dada Sasha, Test Club and Test Driven Developers. See you.